In June 2025, the Middle East held its breath. For 12 tense days from June 13th to June 24th, Israel and Iran were locked in a direct military conflict. This was not a proxy war fought through other groups. It was a direct exchange of fire between two of the region's most powerful adversaries. The conflict, named Operation Rising Lion by Israel, began with a clear set of Israeli objectives. It ended with a fragile ceasefire brokered by the United States. While the fighting was brief, the consequences were enormous. Both countries suffered losses, but the financial and strategic costs have raised serious questions about who truly came out ahead. This short war has reshaped the strategic landscape of the Middle East. The conflict did not happen in a vacuum. Tensions between Israel and Iran had been simmering for decades, centered on Iran's nuclear program. Israel has long viewed a nuclear-armed Iran as a threat to its very existence. The war was the culmination of years of warnings, covert operations, and escalating rhetoric. Israel decided that the time for waiting was over. It launched a major military operation with the stated goal of neutralizing the Iranian nuclear threat once and for all. The world watched as missiles and drones flew, and, a long-feared direct confrontation became a reality. The conflict quickly drew in the United States, which played a crucial role in both the attacks and the eventual ceasefire. Now, with the dust settling, a complex picture is emerging. Both sides have claimed victory. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that all of his country's war goals had been met. In Tehran, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian declared the outcome a total victory for his nation. But the reality is far more complicated than these public statements suggest. To understand who really won, we must look beyond the victory speeches. We need to examine the hard numbers, the strategic outcomes, and the long-term impact on both nations. The cost was not just measured in dollars and cents, but also in lives, security, and future stability. This essay will break down the true cost of this 12-day war. We will explore what Israel hoped to accomplish and what it actually did. We'll look at the staggering financial burden of both offensive and defensive military operations. We will also examine the economic pain felt by ordinary people and businesses in Israel. Finally, we will assess whether the high price paid was worth it. Did Israel succeed in its mission, or did the war create new and more dangerous problems for the future? Answering these questions is key to understanding the new reality in the Middle East after this historic and costly conflict. Israel's decision to launch Operation Rising Lion was driven by a specific and ambitious set of goals. At the very top of the list was the complete destruction of Iran's nuclear program. For years, Israeli leaders had warned that they would not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. This operation was designed to be the decisive blow. The plan was to target and destroy key nuclear facilities, including the heavily fortified sites at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. The goal was not just to damage the program, but to dismantle it so thoroughly that it would take Iran many years to recover, effectively ending its nuclear ambitions for the foreseeable future. A second major objective was to cripple Iran's ballistic missile program. Iran possesses the largest and most diverse missile arsenal in the Middle East. These missiles pose a direct threat to Israeli cities and military bases. Israel's war plan included widespread strikes against missile production facilities, launch sites, and storage depots. By destroying a significant portion of this arsenal and the infrastructure that supports it, Israel hoped to reduce the immediate threat to its population. This would also weaken Iran's ability to project power across the region and threaten Israel and its allies in the future. The aim was to leave Iran's military significantly weakened. Beyond military hardware, Israel also aimed to eliminate key Iranian leaders. This part of the strategy focused on targeted assassinations of high-ranking commanders within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Iran's intelligence services. The belief was that removing these experienced leaders would create chaos and disarray within Iran's military command structure. This would disrupt their ability to coordinate attacks and manage their forces effectively. A successful deep strike against the IRGC leadership, Israel hoped, would have a lasting impact on the organization's operational capabilities, creating a significant setback for the Iranian regime's military and strategic planning. Finally, there was a more ambitious, though less openly stated, goal to encourage regime change. The Israeli strategy included actions designed to destabilize the Iranian government from within. By demonstrating the regime's inability to protect its most valuable assets and its own people, Israel hoped to fuel public discontent. The thinking was that a devastating military blow, combined with economic hardship, could potentially spark widespread protests and challenge the authority of the ruling clerics. While destroying military targets was the primary focus, the hope for internal turmoil that could lead to a new government in Iran was an underlying part of the strategic calculation. During the 12 days of conflict, Iran unleashed a massive barrage against Israel. It launched between 500 and 550 ballistic missiles and over 1,000 drones. This forced Israel to activate its multi-layered air defense system on an unprecedented scale. The cost of this defense was astronomical. Every night, Israel had to decide which incoming threats to intercept, a decision with a hefty price tag. According to military analysts, the nightly cost of operating these sophisticated defense systems ranged from $30 million to as high as $200 million. The total cost of just defending Israeli airspace ran into the hundreds of millions, possibly over $1 billion, over the short course of the war. The financial burden comes from the high cost of the interceptor missiles themselves. Israel's defense shield is made up of several systems, each designed for a different type of threat. The David Sling system, used against medium-range missiles, costs a minimum of $700,000 for each interception, which typically involves firing 2 interceptors. For the long-range ballistic missiles that made up the most serious threat from Iran, Israel relies on its Arrow system. An Arrow 2 interceptor costs around $3 million per missile. The more advanced Arrow 3 interceptor, designed to hit targets outside the atmosphere, costs a staggering $4 million per shot. Firing dozens of these interceptors each night quickly drained both stockpiles and budgets. While the defense systems were highly effective, intercepting an estimated 80 to 90% of missiles and nearly all drones, this success came at a great cost. The massive volleys fired by Iran were a deliberate strategy to overwhelm and deplete Israel's expensive and limited stockpile of interceptors. Iran can produce its missiles and drones for a fraction of what it costs Israel to shoot them down. For every expensive Arrow 3 missile Israel fired, Iran had launched a much cheaper ballistic missile. This created a severe economic imbalance. The war exposed a critical vulnerability. Israel's interceptor supply is not infinite, and replenishing it is a slow and expensive process that relies heavily on international partners like the United States. The sheer volume of the Iranian assault forced Israel into a war of economic attrition in the skies. The conflict demonstrated that an adversary could inflict immense financial damage on Israel simply by forcing it to use its most advanced and costly defensive weapons. This reality will shape future military planning. Israel now faces the challenge of maintaining a sufficient stockpile of interceptors, a task made more difficult by the high cost and long production times. The financial strain of defending the nation was one of the most significant and immediate consequences of the war, highlighting a strategic problem that will persist long after the ceasefire. While defending its skies was incredibly expensive, Israel's offensive operations against Iran carried their own massive price tag. Striking targets deep inside Iranian territory required the use of Israel's most advanced and costly military assets, particularly its air force. The missions were complex and required extensive planning, intelligence, and logistical support. The first week of the war alone cost the Israeli military an estimated $5 billion. According to a former financial advisor to the Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Staff, the daily military cost averaged around $725 million. The first 2 days were the most expensive, costing about $1.5 billion, split between attacking Iran and defending against its retaliation. A major part of the offensive cost was the use of advanced fighter jets, especially the F-35 Adir. These stealth aircraft are essential for penetrating sophisticated enemy air defenses. However, operating them is exceptionally expensive. A single F-35 costs around $100,000 for every hour it is in the air. This figure does not even include the cost of fuel for the long journey to Iran and back, or the price of the precision-guided munitions and bombs it carries. When dozens of these jets are flying missions for hours at a time over a 12-day period, the operational costs quickly add up to hundreds of millions of dollars. The munitions used in these strikes represent another significant expense. To destroy hardened and deeply buried targets like the Fordow nuclear facility, Israel, with US assistance, used specialized bunker buster bombs. These are highly advanced and expensive weapons. Other strikes on IRGC command centers, missile launchers, and nuclear sites at Natanz and Isfahan used a wide array of precision bombs and missiles. Each of these munitions can cost tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. The successful destruction of these targets required a large volume of these costly weapons, further driving up the overall bill for the operation. Beyond the direct costs of flights and bombs, there were other hidden expenses. The operation involved extensive use of intelligence assets, including satellites and spy networks on the ground. Israel even used a secret drone base inside Iran, which required immense resources to establish and operate covertly. Naval assets were also deployed, and the entire military was placed on high alert, which involves significant logistical and personnel costs. When all these elements are combined, the jets, the bombs, the intelligence and the support, the total cost of Israel's 12-day offensive campaign easily ran into the billions of dollars, making it one of the most expensive military operations in the country's history. The war was not just fought on military fronts, it had a severe impact on Israel's civilian economy. Despite the high interception rate of Israel's air defenses, some Iranian missiles made it through. More than 30 ballistic missiles successfully struck Israeli territory, causing significant damage and tragic loss of life, with 28 people killed. Hundreds of buildings were destroyed or badly damaged, particularly in cities like Beersheba. The cost of repairing and rebuilding this physical infrastructure is estimated to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Key scientific and industrial sites were also hit, leading to major economic disruptions that were felt across the country. One of the most significant single strikes was the complete destruction of the Weizmann Institute of Science, a world-renowned research center. The loss of this institution is not just a monetary one, it represents a major blow to Israel's scientific and technological prestige. In the industrial sector, the Bazan refinery, Israel's largest, was hit and forced to shut down. This shutdown alone resulted in daily losses of around $3 million. The closure of Ben Gurion Airport, the country's main international gateway, for several days paralyzed travel and trade. Even after it partially reopened, the disruption to tourism and business travel had a lingering negative effect on the economy. The conflict brought daily life and commerce to a standstill in many parts of the country. With air raid sirens sounding regularly, businesses were forced to close, and employees were unable to work. This resulted in a massive loss of productivity. The Israeli government will have to pay compensation to over 36,000 affected citizens whose homes or properties were damaged. It will also need to support hundreds of businesses that suffered losses due to the forced closures. The total cost of this compensation is expected to run into hundreds of millions of dollars, adding another layer of financial strain on the state's resources. The overall economic shock was substantial. An economic policy institute at Reichman University had previously estimated that a month-long war with Iran could cost the Israeli economy at least $12 billion. While this conflict lasted only 12 days, it inflicted a significant portion of that projected damage. The combination of physical destruction, business shutdowns, lost productivity, and government compensation created a powerful economic headwind. This direct hit to the domestic economy, separate from the military spending, demonstrates how modern warfare can inflict deep financial wounds even when a country has strong defenses. The immense cost of the 12-day war forced the Israeli government to make difficult and painful decisions about its national budget. The money to pay for the billions spent on offense and defense had to come from somewhere. Almost immediately, Israel's Ministry of Finance began looking for ways to cover the unexpected expenses. The first and most controversial step was a proposal to make significant cuts to essential public services. The ministry requested a $200 million cut from the budgets for health, education, and social services. This meant less money for hospitals, schools, and support for the country's most vulnerable citizens. This move highlights a classic dilemma faced by nations at war, the trade-off between guns and butter. To fund the military, civilian programs often have to be sacrificed. The proposed cuts were met with concern from the public and political opposition, who argued that ordinary citizens should not have to pay the price for the war through diminished social services. However, the financial reality was stark. The war had created a massive hole in the national finances that needed to be filled quickly. This budget reshuffle was a direct consequence of the conflict, bringing the costs of the war home to every Israeli family. The cuts were only one part of the solution. The other part was a massive injection of funds into the Ministry of Defense. The Finance Ministry proposed transferring nearly $1 billion directly to the defense budget to cover the immediate costs of the operation and begin the process of replenishing spent munitions. This shift came on top of already soaring defense spending. In 2024, the year before the war, Israel's defense budget had already increased by 65% compared to 2023, reaching $46.5 billion. The 2025 conflict ensures that this high level of spending will continue, if not increase further. This reallocation of national resources has long-term implications. Some Israeli economists warned that a prolonged conflict with Iran could destroy as much as 1/5 of the country's GDP and push it toward a serious financial crisis. While the war was short, it set a dangerous precedent. The national budget is now heavily skewed towards defense, potentially crowding out investments in technology, infrastructure, and education that are vital for Israel's long-term economic health. The financial choices made in the wake of the war will shape Israeli society and its economy for years to come, demonstrating that the cost of conflict extends far beyond the battlefield. When evaluating the success of Operation Rising Lion, the results are mixed. Israel did achieve some of its key objectives, but it fell short on others. The most significant success was the severe damage inflicted on Iran's nuclear program. With U.S. support, Israeli strikes successfully destroyed major facilities at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. They also eliminated a large number of Iran's centrifuges and killed at least 14 key nuclear scientists. According to military assessments, Iran's uranium enrichment capacity was effectively destroyed. In this primary goal, Israel could claim a major victory. The immediate threat of a rapid Iranian breakout to a nuclear weapon was significantly delayed. However, this victory was not as absolute as it first appeared. A secret report from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, which emerged shortly after the ceasefire, offered a more cautious assessment. The report concluded that the strikes had only delayed Iran's nuclear program by a few months, likely less than 6. It noted that Iran had anticipated such an attack, and had already moved most of its stockpiles of enriched uranium to smaller secret backup facilities. Furthermore, the strikes on underground sites like Fordow failed to cause a complete collapse of the structures. So, while Israel set back the program's industrial capacity, it did not eliminate Iran's nuclear knowledge or its crucial raw materials. On its second major goal, destroying Iran's ballistic missile program, Israel largely failed. While some launch sites and command centers were hit, Iran's missile arsenal, the largest in the Middle East, remained fundamentally intact. Iran proved this point emphatically. Just before the ceasefire took hold, it launched a final, powerful wave of missiles that caused significant damage in Beersheba. This demonstrated that its capacity to strike Israel had not been meaningfully degraded. The war showed that Iran's missile program is too large, too dispersed, and too well defended to be eliminated by a limited air campaign. Israel's other objectives also saw mixed results. The goal of assassinating high-ranking Iranian leaders was partially successful. The initial strikes did kill a number of senior IRGC commanders, which likely caused temporary disruption. However, the core leadership of the IRGC and the Iranian regime remained in place. As for the goal of instigating regime change, the war appears to have had the opposite effect. The external attacks seem to rally many Iranians around their government, boosting domestic support and nationalist sentiment. In the final analysis, Israel achieved a temporary tactical win on the nuclear front, but failed to secure its broader strategic goals. The 12-day war, while short, has unleashed a series of unintended consequences that may create more long-term problems than it solved. For Israel, one of the biggest risks is that the attack has made Iran more determined than ever to acquire a nuclear weapon. While the strikes delayed the program, they also may have convinced Tehran that only a nuclear deterrent can protect it from future attacks. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that Iran is now more resolved to maintain its program. By trying to eliminate the threat, Israel may have inadvertently accelerated Iran's motivation to cross the nuclear threshold, turning a preventable risk into an inevitability. Another significant blowback for Israel was the exposure of its intelligence methods. The operation revealed the existence of a secret drone base inside Iran which was reportedly run from local workshops. It also exposed the extent of Israel's spy networks. In the aftermath of the strikes, Iranian intelligence launched a massive crackdown, arresting dozens of individuals suspected of collaborating with Israel. This has likely dismantled key parts of the intelligence infrastructure that took Israel years to build. Iran is also now acutely aware of the vulnerabilities in its air defense and cybersecurity systems, and is working rapidly to patch them, making future Israeli operations much more difficult and risky. For Iran, the war was devastating in terms of material and military losses. However, it also provided some strategic benefits. The conflict allowed Iran to test its missile capabilities against one of the world's most advanced air defense systems. It gathered valuable data on Israeli response times and interceptor performance. The regime also used the conflict to galvanize support at home, painting itself as a heroic defender of the nation against Israeli and American aggression. Iranian President Pezeshkian's declaration of total victory, while factually questionable, resonated with a domestic audience and may have temporarily strengthened the government's hold on power. Perhaps the most dangerous long-term consequence is the establishment of a new, lower threshold for direct conflict. For decades, the rivalry between Israel and Iran was fought in the shadows. This war brought it out into the open. Both sides have now shown a willingness to strike each other's territory directly. The ceasefire brokered by the US is fragile, with violations reported almost immediately. This sets the stage for a future where direct military exchanges could become more common. The old rules of engagement have been broken, and the region is now in a more volatile and unpredictable era, where the next miscalculation could lead to a much wider and more destructive war. The 12-day war between Israel and Iran in June 2025 ended not with a clear winner, but with two nations left to grapple with the immense costs and uncertain consequences. Israel launched Operation Rising Lion with the ambitious goal of permanently dismantling Iran's nuclear and missile programs. It paid a staggering price, spending billions on military operations and suffering significant economic damage at home. While it succeeded in temporarily crippling Iran's nuclear infrastructure, it failed to destroy Iran's vast missile arsenal or destabilize its regime. The victory Israel claimed was tactical and temporary, not strategic and decisive. For its part, Iran endured heavy military and human losses. Its prized nuclear facilities were left in ruins and it lost senior military commanders. Yet, it emerged from the conflict with a renewed sense of purpose. The attacks may have strengthened the regime's domestic standing and hardened its resolve to pursue a nuclear capability as the ultimate security guarantee. Iran demonstrated its ability to strike Israel directly, inflicting casualties and economic pain, thereby shattering Israel's sense of invulnerability. In this new, dangerous reality, Iran may feel more audacious, believing it has weathered the storm and can continue to challenge Israeli and US power in the region. The conflict has fundamentally altered the strategic equation in the Middle East. The unwritten rule that prevented direct state-on-state attacks has been broken, leaving the region on a knife's edge. The ceasefire remains tenuous, and the risk of future confrontations is now higher than ever. Israel paid billions for a few months of breathing room on the nuclear issue, but in doing so, it may have created a more determined and battle-hardened adversary. The war has shown that a military solution to the Iranian nuclear question is fraught with risk and comes at an unsustainable cost. Ultimately, the question of who really won has no simple answer. Israel achieved a short-term military objective but faced enormous financial costs and potentially worsened its long-term strategic position. Iran suffered a major blow but may have gained the political will and public support to pursue its ambitions more aggressively. The only clear outcome is that the path to a stable and peaceful Middle East has become more difficult. The fragile peace that now holds is shadowed by the knowledge that the next round of conflict could be far more devastating for everyone involved.